It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And we have a guest. Hello, guest.
I'm Naked Bee.
It is my old friend Naked Bee, and we are here to discuss the Vows and Honor series of fantasy novels, or really short stories, that some of which have been compressed into novel form, by Mercedes Lackey.
Which was a listener request, but one I was happy to fulfill.
Yes. These books were a part of Alexis's childhood. Alarmingly, now that I've read them.
Alarmingly, because I was 11. But yes, my brother and I collaborated on on fan comics featuring Tarma and Knuckles having adventures.
That's fantastic.
This is mine. I've been waiting to share the story until the podcast started because I wanted to hear Isaac's reaction live.
You've killed me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to continue.
They fought an evil wizard.
Do you still have them?
No, that was like so many house moves ago, and also multiple decades. But it's
Wizards versus Volcel Barbarians and Knuckles, a podcast for your ears.
Yes. Anyway,
yes.
I say this, Max being my little brother for listeners. I say this to underscore the degree to which these books were very formative on my 11-year-old psyche.
I have decorously refrained from connecting the dots. And will continue to do so. So these books are nuts.
Yes. So, okay, first of all, are there wizards?
Multitudinous wizards.
Well, we forgot to actually give the summary.
Yes, the summary. B, it's usually the guest job to do it. The podcast format went completely out of my head when Knuckles entered the picture.
Sure, I'm ready. So I'm gonna say, what if classic sword and sorcery adventures, but they were both women? Tarma is
basically
tall and pointy, and her special skills are sword fighting and horse riding. Kethri is blonde and curvy, and she is from the hippie do-gooder school of magic. Also, Kethri has a magic sword that only helps women and is a plot driver for many of their adventures. Also, Tarma gets a telepathic wolf cat person, because you can't have a fantasy series without a cool animal companion. And they have adventures.
And what do they do on these adventures?
I was so surprised that the first novel was a bunch of short stories strung together. I had not remembered that at all.
I know, me neither.
The second novel is more of an arc, but there are so many adventures that they have, and so many adventures that they've clearly had off-screen in other short stories that were not part of this collection and are going to have later, that I started writing out the plot, and I was like, well, how succinctly, there's a murder mystery, and then there's a rebellion, and then there's some mercenaries, and then there's some bandits, and then there's a demon, and this is too much.
Yes. They go on a bunch of adventures that are largely motivated by whatever Mercedes Misty is annoyed by on that particular day, or by rape and revenge.
And sometimes both.
Wizards feature prominently.
Wizards abound.
Of all different kinds. But are there lesbians?
Disappointingly, not really.
Yeah, they clearly exist in the world because our protagonists are constantly doing things so they're not, mistaken for lesbians.
Or occasionally doing things so that they are mistaken for lesbians, which is a fun touch.
Yes, as camouflage.
But in my heart, they are. The author just doesn't want to admit it.
Yeah,
I have a number of ways that I can make that happen. But I think that it's important to share with you, because you didn't read the third installment of short stories, that the author says that when she came up with Tamara and Kethri, they were in a period of fantasy where it was just the swords and sorcery genre was just like really hitting its stride, and the protagonists were all either muscle bound, Conan the Barbarian types, or lesbians.
Hmm.
And I want to know where all this lesbian sword and sorcery went.
I feel exactly the same way. I don't know what she's talking about. I would love to know what she's talking about. But she says, at least, that she wrote this as a reaction to that trope, which apparently existed, and that she wanted to write a pair of heterosexual, or at least not lesbian, fantasy female heroes, which she did not really succeed at doing.
No.
Right. They are so married. As much time as the book spends on saying, oh, and Kethri likes sleeping with all these other people, and Tarma had her sexuality surgically removed and doesn't desire anybody.
By a god.
Yes, no, these women are married to each other.
Yeah.
And when I started out reading this, I was like, okay, they're, it's sort of fun. We're sublimating this, relationship or whatever, or, but as you go on, the sort of the competness of it gets more just straight up het and this is, I think, more of a political or a social thing than a sexual thing for reasons that we can get into in the discussion. And our heroes do fight wizards.
Boy, do they.
Mm-hmm.
There's some good mage battles in these books.
Yeah. So why should you read these books?
I mean, they're fun, right? Like I do think that premise of I want just standard Conan the Barbarian traveling the land with the sword and some magic, but with women. It is that, and that was pretty neat to read.
Yeah, like I feel like the quality, they remain. I somehow fortunately for my 11-year-old psyche, a lot of the incredibly weird sex stuff went over my head when I was 11. But they like revisiting it, they're still pretty entertaining. Mm-hmm. And that's, like I wasn't bored.
Yes. I was coming at this as a sort of like, we've talked about Marion Zimmer Bradley. Now we're going to talk about Mercedes Lackey, and
who is one of her who's probably her most successful protege.
Yes. And maybe it's MZB's specific lesbian books that Mercedes Lackey was thinking about. But she
didn't write that many lesbians either, though.
Yeah, I still don't know what she's talking about there, unless it's Tomoe Gozen. But
it's just Tomoe Gozen.
It's just Tomoe Gozen. But Xena the Warrior Princess I don't think the timeline works out.
No.
But
I had to look that up. Xena comes out 10 years later.
Yes.
But it's really Xena coded.
Mm-hmm. It's super Xena coded, or perhaps Xena is Tarma and Kethri coded.
Right.
Except they had the courage to actually make them lesbians.
Yes, on TV no less. But Mercedes Lackey is a better writer than Marion Zimmer Bradley, and is more consistent, certainly partially because she's writing all of her own material, and
yes. At least at this stage of her career.
At least at this stage of her career, and these are. I would say that these are like they're somewhat boilerplate. This is definitely a person for whom writing is a job, and she's pumping it out, and like it's workmanlike is how I would describe it. But it's good. If the job is to make like compelling, interesting fantasy stories that don't drag, she's doing that very well, and I think that it actually does a disservice to it by reading all of this back to back to back, because I don't think that's how it was meant to be presented initially. So the some of the sameness comes through in a way that it wouldn't otherwise. But like on an individual story to story basis, it's entertaining and there's some very interesting stuff.
Yeah, and like magical telepathic wolf cat and magical sword and mage battles and
plenty for an 11-year-old to really be into.
Exactly.
Which unfortunately means that the 11-year-old is also being exposed to. So why shouldn't you read this book?
There's so much rape in these books. Like I'd forgotten how much rape was in like 80s and 90s fantasy.
And I think that's right. Like when I was reading them as a teenager, I did not notice. I
No,
did
me
not
neither.
notice at all.
Because it was normal for that era.
But reading them now, it just kept hitting me in the face over and over again. What is their backstory? Rape. What is their punishment for crimes? Rape. What is the last victim had? Rape. Yeah.
Right. What is the plot driver of this particular thing?
Every time, at every single opportunity.
And like, there's certain ways in which there, she has the courage to make men also rape victims. And also that, she shows that people have a lot of, and this is actually throughout her books. Isaac, it's not just the weird force femme thing that we'll get to.
Did you hear me inhale?
Yes, I did. But like, I think she did another trilogy around this time, same of her career, with a gay male lead, and he gets raped, and so there's, and it's good that she's showing that there's like a difference in the ways that different people can react and handle this, but just, oh my God. Like,
I think, we've said on this podcast before that, the sort of like, you can't mention sexual assault in your book if you want it to, if you want it to be published. You certainly can't put it on screen.
We're against that.
We're against that. But if you want to understand how we got here,
right, then
this is a good snapshot of a particular era in science fiction and fantasy. Even from, and of course written by women, and from a woman's perspective, and very pro-woman, and, nuanced, as you said, somewhat in the take, but still just like, wow.
I feel
the
like
gender go ahead.
That both the reason to read it and not to read it are how very 80s it is. Like,
yeah.
Like I was surprised and shocked at how different it is from the stuff I'm reading now. But it was so interesting to see someone living in the 80s drowning in this media landscape and being like, what am I going to do with it? Well, I'm going to try this. And I'm happy that we're not there anymore, but I sort of remember how that seemed like the logical response to be like, well, yeah,
definitely. I mean, you're reading this, it really brought back so much of a memory of what it was like being a young nerd in the early 90s. Which is several years after these books have come out, but still of just recapturing that kind of both past self, but also like that era of what just all the books you could read were like.
Mm-hmm.
Also, though, the gender politics in this are incredibly bizarre and, again, very much like of an era that is gone.
I will want to look into that thoroughly in our discussion, because this isn't a misandrist story. We don't hate men in the Tamara and Kethri universe.
We make a real point of establishing that Kethri at least likes men.
Yes, we have a real contempt for weakness, however.
Yeah,
and a real contempt for horniness. For the most part, also, you probably shouldn't read this book if you're fat or if you have mouse brown hair.
Yep.
There's this is very much, speaking of the 80s. Your heroes are pretty and your villains are ugly, and that's it. And particularly, if you are what Mercedes thinks is ugly, you're going to find a lot of like horrible people who look like you and have horrible ironic punishments done to them. So there's that.
Also, there's all sorts of trans readings of these books, and they're all kind of awful.
We'll get to that particular part.
Not just the force femme, also like just sort of the idea that asexuality, being asexual and agender are both the same thing, but also if you're agender, you still have to have agender. Yes.
Several of these of the plots in these stories would only be found in contemporary media in pornography. And and I was like torn as to whether anybody was supposed to be being titillated. And my thought was, if not, how on earth did you get here?
Right. So I feel like we've segued into the content warning section. I feel like why shouldn't you read this other than how incredibly 80s it is, and that it, I guess also it drags in some places, and as you said, the prose is workmanlike.
Yes. Also songs.
Oh yeah. Also, well, there's an entire appendix of songs at the back. Also, conlangs. So much conlang.
So many apostrophes.
So many apostrophes.
Our warrior Tamara's favorite oath is warrior's oath. I think that's just good. But yes, content warnings.
Rape.
Creative and numerous types of sexual assault.
Including
revenge
some
rape
enabled, revenge rape that is enabled
portrayed
by...
in a positive light.
Yep.
And torture, kidnapping, murder.
Mm-hmm. And just a lot of murder that's treated really lightly. I mean, they're mercenaries, which you're like, well, that makes sense. That's the whole genre deal. But they are just killing people left and right, and they don't have any trouble with that. That's fine. That's their job.
Yes.
Yeah. Forced marriage portrayed as, in one case, as a good thing.
Yes. No, really, like, anything goes as long as it's a proper ironic punishment for something a person has done.
Yeah.
And
also fairly pro-monarchy.
Oh, no. Like these books are extremely culturally conservative.
Yeah.
And and I think that just there's an extent to which that comes with the territory, but I think that it really leans into it in a way that not all of the books that we've read in this milieu do.
Right. Our good guys are always right, and because they're always right, the gods love them and give them strength so they can defeat their enemies. The evil guys are always purely evil. They're never just someone they're in conflict with. They're evil.
Yep. This is D&D alignment morality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which kind of makes sense because it is growing out of the same cultural wellspring that produced Dungeons and Dragons. So
yeah, I also want to talk about that since I think that you both know more about like the history of the development of this kind of fantasy than I do. Because I was like, wow, this setting is very D&D like. But I think, as you say, that was just the way it was. That was just the style at the time. All right, does that cover everything? We might have missed out on a couple mornings. I'm gonna list them here if I can. Mind break, force femme, hypnotism, incest, bestiality, child molestation, rape. Are we reading Game of Thrones? Just what kind of tags are those? These are stories meant to read as comedy in large part. It was acceptable in the 80s. It was acceptable at the time. Spoiler zone. So, Alexis, what was it like reading these stories as an 11-year-old?
As an 11, well, it's funny how little I retained. Like, I remember that there was a demon, but all the, and I remembered the force femming happening, but I'd forgotten that he comes back with the demon. And yeah, I mean, mostly it was just like, wow, cool ladies with swords and telepathic animal friends.
And horses.
And horses and telepathic, and one of the horses is telepathic, though that's only in the second book. And it was just, I can see why my 11-year-old self got very fixated, particularly on, the agendered swordswoman with the wolf cat telepathic companion, and decided that what she really needed to do was co-star in my brother's comics featuring Knuckles.
The comparable thing in my fantasy reading history would have been the Dragon Riders of Pern books.
Right, which I read even younger, believe it or not.
Both in the, telepathic animal companion, wouldn't that be nice, for a lonely child kind of deal, and in the, there's a lot of weird sex stuff going on here that I'm more or less not, cottoning onto. And B, your history with these books?
Yeah, so I would have been 14 and 15 when they came out, and just based on the condition of the books, like I would have gotten the first one and like read it a bunch of times, and it was more familiar than the second one, which um, I probably only read, 5 times after I got it. um, but right, like I would have read them in that, eighth, ninth grade, and then through high school, and then not touch them. They've survived all these moves with me, but it was fascinating to see how much I remembered the cover, and that the covers were just deeply ingrained. And when I saw alternate covers online, I was like, oh, those aren't right. But
No,
that
I had the same reaction to the covers.
Oh, they're objectively not right. Those new covers, my God. I mean, not to be, I mean, here's my, like, I'll pretend to be Miss Mercedes Lackey here, and something absolutely horrible is going to happen to the graphic designers who decided what this generation of fantasy novel covers is supposed to look like, possibly involving them being, oh, I don't know, not consensually married to like an 80-year-old draftsman who still, knows how to do like font kerning by hand.
right.
Right.
So yeah,
the original covers are good.
They're so beautiful, and
Yes.
and that was, I think, mostly what I remember, because I've just carried these books as physical objects around and remembered. Yeah, that was the cool mage and the cool horse lady with the sword. That was so great. But I hadn't reread them, and I'm glad to have reread them. Like some of the other books that I've revisited from that time period, they're just bad. They're trash. They're schlock. This is not, right. This has plenty of reasons not to read it, but right, they're solidly written. They were responding to something of the time. They had something they were trying to say on purpose, and they said that, which I appreciated.
Yeah, there's a depth here, even if some of the things in the depth are kind of awful.
Well, I mean, and this is in the third book, B, but like the last story in the trilogy, as it were, that is included in publishing is Tarma and Kethri have all grown up, and Kethri has had her children, and the children are getting to be the warrior age, which is like 12, of course. And there's some real sort of earnest thought in that last story about how do we protect our children from the traumas that we grew up with. And I think that there's this sort of like there is a real attempt in this text to reckon with the feeling of growing up, I think, in this generation, in this sort of climate of not only in the real world, but in art, where it's like, what was a woman in these fantasy books that are presumably, in a very important part of my, being, and how do I react to that? And, just like fight, anger, kill, and like revenge fantasy seems to me to be like a reasonable response to this. But it's not you're not going to come up with a thought through, measured, enlightened response under those circumstances. So you get this like first reaction, like real product of anger stuff, particularly in the earlier stories, that caroms off some very strange things like, well, what's the appropriate revenge for a mass rapist and murderer? Well, it's to do the worst thing possible to a person, which is to turn them into an attractive woman, and let him loose without
any protection.
Without any protection, and while being very clear that even though he may look like a woman, he's still a man until he gets the magic surgery.
Right.
Which, great. Thanks for throwing that in. I wonder if that was in reaction to anything, that you needed to be very precise about that.
Well, and so as somebody who's read a lot of Mercedes Lackey's books in this world, I'll note that like the ironic rape revenge thing comes up a lot. There's in her first trilogy, I don't know how I still remember this. I haven't read those books in 20 years, but there's a child molester who his ironic punishment is getting locked into an endless nightmare from the perspective of his victims, where he's just getting raped over and over and over again by himself. And which is actually especially ironic given, who ended up launching her career, but...
Well, we do need to talk about that because one of the very first stories in this whole setup involves a child molester, the person who molested Kethri when she was a kid. And there was a very modern reaction to it where it's like, the first thing is, okay, she confronts him and discovers that he's just a weak man, who can't hurt her anymore, whose desire to prey on children comes from the fact that he's scared of adult women, which is like a relatively, standard reading of the situation, which you could still find in currency today. And she doesn't need to hurt him and humiliate him because that's sort of beneath her at that point.
Well, they do still
hurt him and humiliate him, of course,
right.
But
they don't.
Given the extent to which they do hurt and humiliate people in these books, he gets off very easily, I think.
And almost entirely off screen, which I kept finding that, let's say, just frictiony, right? I'd be like, okay, and here's where we're going to have the big confrontation. And it just skips ahead to the tavern afterwards, talking about what the trial that they had and how he lost all his money. And I'm like, oh okay.
It does make me wonder if possibly the editor was like, nobody wants to read a legal drama. And I mean, they're wrong, but...
Or, okay, we've gotten to the word count for this story.
Right.
Time to wrap it up.
You
know, or maybe the editor who in the third book, another thing that Misty says about Marion Zimmer Bradley is that Marion is sick of rape and revenge stories. And sure, Mercedes wrote a lot of them, but maybe it sticks in your throat a little bit if you happen to be married to a rapist, but
in fact be one yourself. But of course, at the time that these stories were coming out, I'm pretty sure by then it was an open secret that Marion Zimmer Bradley's husband was a child rapist. It was that she was as well wasn't, I think, openly known for quite some time. Which
really, it's very hard to say the author is dead when we're told the story of these first stories being submitted, one of which is the one that we were just talking about. And according to Misty, how enthusiastic Marion was about being like, yes, these are great. I want to my only problem is that I can't decide which one to publish, darn it. And what was going through everybody's heads.
Right. I would like actually to insert a brief historical note about this, which is that, so one of the things that Marion Zimmer Bradley did that launched many careers was she was the editor of a fantasy magazine, science fiction fantasy magazine, but she also edited, and I believe it was one of the first few that the first Tarma and Kethri story showed up, and I think it was volume 3. She would do these sword and sorceress anthologies, and the idea was that it was just a collection of short stories, hand-selected by Marion Zimmer Bradley, and the only rule was that they had to be fantasy and they had to be about women. And there was definitely a kind of style to them. I know some successful authors who attempted to write a story specifically, for that style. It did not get accepted. But, so this is sort of part of the same, I mean, the Sword and Sorceress anthologies went into the high teens, early 20s, I think. But this is still when they're very early. And so this is part of a sort of a broad, like the Tarma and Kethri books and the stories that they came out of are part of this broader early movement to produce this kind of, it doesn't have to be explicitly feminist, but it is going to be stories about women in fantasy that aren't going to be about, that aren't focusing on, at least on them getting raped all the time, only some of the time.
But yeah, it was as part of the anthology that these first stories were submitted, and that grew into the a bunch of stories being collated into the first novel, and then the second novel being written. And the second novel is it is a short novel, and it feels sort of it is kind of less interesting than the short stories, largely because it's more normal.
Also, because she keeps trying to like tie it to the Valdemar, which is where like most of her other books in this world are set, and it's just not really working.
Right.
Yes.
It didn't need to be there, but it's there. I mean, and I can imagine I was probably pretty excited to be like, ooh, I recognize it's the magic horses,
I'm sure,
right?
yeah.
But
right.
But reading it again, I was like, oh, right, you got to mention. It felt like a Avengers movie or something, right? Where they just have to mention it and bring it in, and you're like, yeah.
There's also some fun, like one of the feelings that you get reading this is that the author is extremely scrupulous. And we've not yet evolved to the point where a science fiction fantasy author who is confronted by science fiction fantasy fans, who are of course the worst kind of people in the world, who are confronted with plot holes, to be just like, A, a wizard did it, B, what do you care anyway? And of course, I would never point out a plot hole or nitpick. It's 100% top-down, big picture, thematic analysis and constructive criticism on this podcast. Anybody who says otherwise is lying, because there's a lot of very conscientious addressing of things that don't quite make sense inside the plot. Like, there's the period in the second book where like, oh, these hills which are supposed to be here are actually a part of these other hills which are supposed to be over here. They're just not quite connected in a way that would be obvious. So in fact, I wasn't wrong about that. Or it's like, I don't care.
Like, I kept really liking the world that was built, but being really annoyed at the exposition and the way lore was delivered, right?
There's so many exposition dumps.
And they're so awkward, and they do feel like her anticipating somebody picking apart a plot hole. There was something where like a soldier was wounded and they're healing them with magic, and then Kethri has to think to herself, well, it's a good thing they've got that anti-infection stuff, otherwise we'd lose so many more soldiers. And I'm like, what? This goes nowhere. Why did you even tell me this fact?
It feels
like it just... I think that some of this also is just like every minor pet peeve that the author had about fantasy is getting shoehorned in there. We have to mention the anti-infection stuff because clearly it's really annoyed her that in previous fantasy novels the author has not there's medieval level medicine, but people aren't dying of medieval level and bacterial infections.
Yes, no, this is absolutely true. This reactivity is nowhere as obvious or as, I think, funny to me as it is in the latter half of the first book, where my reaction, the specific part where my reaction went from, there's a lot of rape going on here, but these are still like rollicking fun adventures, to whoa, which is the aforementioned bandit gets turned into a woman so that he can be raped, and then summons a demon who turns him into a real woman, quote unquote, and then rapes him a bunch more, but makes him like it. Where we get, and then the story in response to that, what we get is at the start of it, like Tamar and Kethri are holding court in a pub and having a philosophical moral discussion with the priest about whether they were justified in doing that or not.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which felt to me like such a, here, I will respond to the criticisms that I've gotten for my incredibly out-of-pocket storytelling by having a theological discussion within the rules of the world, where God is real, remember?
Gods are real.
Gods are real and justice is real. That, no, in fact, like there may be some discussion about whether, like, whether evil can be, redeemed or not, because this is also a monotheistic world.
No, it's not. There's two gods minimum.
They all say wisely to one another, oh, but I am but a face of the God
but
that you...
if you read the annotations in the song appendix, you will note that Tarma's people have both a god and a goddess. It's just Tarma doesn't care about the god, so he never comes up. But he comes up in the songs. This is why I sent you the ebook, to make sure that you read the song appendix, Isaac.
I'm going to admit here that I did not read the entire song appendix. Pages upon pages of doggerel about...
Apparently
about
these days you can
deeds.
actually hear the songs on YouTube. I did not have the courage to look them up.
Yeah, I looked up a couple and found one that I did not care for, and one by a more recent recording by an unaffiliated a cappella group that was actually quite nice. So it was pretty mixed, so I didn't dare look for a third one.
Well, unfortunately, I do music for this podcast, so you know what's going to have to happen.
I do.
Yeah. You can hear the sinking in my voice. Bonds of blood and bonds of steel, bonds of God, fire, and of need, bonds that only we two feel, bonds of word and bonds of deed, bonds we took and knew the cost, bonds we swore without mistake, bonds that give more than we lost, bonds that grant more than we take. You get the idea. I will put the full version that I mocked up at the end of the podcast. The songs are all extremely charming. Some of them very funny. All of them have perfect scansion, almost to a fault. There is something in the earnestness of it all that is like simultaneously extremely cringe and wonderful. And also clearly something that I would do given half a chance. So, you know, there you go.
Anyway, there is a bare minimum of two gods in this world. There's a god and a goddess, and there's possibly more, but every single time there's another one, it is later established that probably one of the, it's probably still either the one or the other.
Right. So,
but there are two. It is a ditheistic world.
Yes. But this is a world with deterministic justice, and sort of the absolute judgment, and so Tamara and Kethri are essentially right, even though they do mellow a little bit in their old age. But yes, no, the author will anticipate your critiques and will write little notes into the story to get around any nitpicking, because that nitpicking is very often the kernel of the stories themselves.
Yes. So let's talk about this bandit.
I mean,
why didn't they just kill him? Why is death not too good? Right? They could have just killed him. That would have been fine.
They absolutely should have just killed him.
There has to be a slow ratcheting up of ironic punishments over the course of all these stories, right? You have to have like people who do worse and worse things and then have worse and worse things happen to them, and just murder or even being tortured to death isn't going to cut it anymore after a certain point. And we eventually, at the end of Oathbreaker, we get all the way up to like being sort of melted into a flesh lump by God, as the ultimate endpoint of all of this, after being chanted at by a bunch of people.
By his sister's ghost, right?
Right. Yes. But it's in her aspect as divine punishment.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was cool.
I think that there needs to be because the catharsis of all of these stories, these are all basically revenge stories, right? Mm-hmm. Like somebody does something bad and then something awful has to happen to them via the hand of Tamara and Kethri. And they are at their most successful when the bad thing that the person has done is simply annoying. And so they can get a like horrible out-of-pocket punishment, which is still basically funny and lighthearted. But if somebody does something really bad, then something much worse, or that something of like narrative balance has to happen to them, and just killing that guy wasn't going to cut it.
Yeah, It's just, and I mean, I think you're right that this is also something of a commentary on the times that these stories are written, that the worst punishment the author can think of is turn him into an attractive woman and, abandon him by the side of the road.
All right. In order to get this complicated story across, I've written a ballad of my own. Last a long knife banded chief, whose magic mind could cloud the wits, would join a band as seeming friend, and soon that band would meet its end, its women raped and torn to bits. Last a long knife met his match, our heroes figured out his game and turned him to a seeming wench, on whom his men their lusts would quench, with all his body stayed the same. Hang on, page 2. Last a long knife sought revenge, and begged a lusty demon's aid. The demon made his seeming real, for vengeance and for sex appeal he turned Lastel into a maid. Last a long knife demon bride, her knife no longer quite the part, surrendered now with seeming bliss to demon concupiscence, with all it tormented her heart. Last a long knife got her way, and Tamra ended up despoiled. But it was just a seeming win, she shrugged it off and did her in. At last in death was Lastel foiled.
But like, what's interesting to me though is that then, when she comes back around to it, when he goes and hunts down the demon, like, it is clear that she is actually, it's not supposed to just be funny, right? That the author is actually grappling with how horrible an experience this must have been.
Yeah. Which again sort of presages a lot of, discussion about trans issues going forward, mind you. But I think that like part of it comes from just I think that the idea of, oh, wouldn't it be fun if the villain was a woman, and so that we can't use the magic sword that only, that doesn't attack women on them. I think just part of it comes from that as a narrative device. But then we get the question of like, okay, what is a woman? What is an evil woman? Where do our sympathies have to lie? And like after the bandit has gotten, has become a woman and therefore has sort of understood the suffering that he has inflicted upon people, he is simply allowed to be killed at that point without fanfare.
Right, once he's learned his lesson.
There's almost this like a period of atonement.
Yep.
Before he can deserve death.
Again, I think that the reason that I said monotheistic before is that this feels very like heaven and hell Christian morality underpinning this universe. In a way that's sort of passed down from Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and and like I said this to you before off camera, but like this feels like writing, like this feels like the reading of a sort of a sort of center right leading newspaper columnist to me. In some ways, it's like there's an issue of the day. And we have to like dispatch the issue of the day with like a lot of sort of smug, ironic eye rolling about how self-evidently stupid and bad the bad thing is. But there's also like that element of like freaky titillation about it, where it's like, don't you want to read about the rape? Don't you want to go on the daytime TV show and hear about like the sort of the horrible child molesting and that kind of stuff? And so, we're using the titillation on the one hand as a narrative engine, and then we are, but we're smacking it with a big ruler afterwards to make sure that that it's bad. And also in some ways making the punishment titillating too, so you get him coming and going. But it feels very sort of it feels very American to me. It feels very sort of very Christian to me. It feels very like, center right, meat and potatoes to me, which is very interesting given that this is also like, thoroughgoingly and knowingly feminist, and sort of definitely being presented as being counter the sort of the dominant narratives of the period.
Yeah, and I mean, putting this back in context, she was writing queer characters, not as much in the Tarma and Catherine books, which is interesting, but though you get, I think you get a few just like you get some background lesbians also in the Mercenary Company. But there's other background lesbians in her first trilogy, and the one that I think comes after this in terms of publication era, she has a gay male protagonist for the trilogy, and all sorts of horrible things happen to him.
But yeah, it's clearly a universe where it's okay to be queer, even if these stories or these protagonists aren't. And I can imagine that being really attractive. And one thing I was trying to like look through my shelf of books from the same era, and I didn't see a lot of duo protagonists, either male or female. And so I wonder if that was just my memory and the books I had managed to save, or if that was unusual, because I know like later, getting into slash and fan fiction, it'd be buddy cop, bonded brothers for life, for forever. But I don't see that in a bunch of the other books I was reading, where there's like a bonded pair who are sworn together thick or thin, and I just found that really a really interesting part of this, that it kept going back and forth. Like neither of them was the protagonist with a buddy. They would both sort of get equal screen time and point of view time.
Yeah, you're right. Like everything example I'm thinking of, like when there's two protagonists in books from that era, I feel like they're love interests.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right. Again, we sort of have to go, forward to find the things that remind me of this. And
or so, backward, I think. Like, I feel like there's some earlier sword and sorcery stuff that has, bonds of brotherhood and things like that.
Mm. But yeah, no, it is remarkable, like that it's very conservative in some ways, as you say, but particularly if you keep in mind the time that it was, or very conservative in some ways, as I just said, but as you just said, very, particularly when you think about the time, very inclusive. I mean, I would say that there are, Tamara and Kethri do think that being gay is a little bit citified and kind of, not really the thing in terms of honor. But I would not call it like homophobic. Transphobic maybe, but I would not call it homophobic.
I would say on the reasons not to read, I was constantly struck by Kethri's one true purpose is to someday in the future have a lot of babies.
Yes.
And one of the things that marks Tarma as good is that she loves children. And, I was just not into that. Like, it was fine. I don't think it's a problem in any way, but I just kept rubbing up against it and being like, are we going to mention how great a baby factory Kethri is again? Okay.
Well, I want to share with you, because you didn't read the book, the punchline to this entire thing, which is the author's note previous to the big story about raising all the children that we get in the third book, where Mercedes reveals that she and her husband, they have parrots.
Yeah, they don't have kids. They are cheerfully child-free, but have like a gajillion birds. I think they also did raptor rehabilitation.
Yes, and I was like, of course you're a bird freak. Takes one to know one.
So this is why Tarma is always, crow-haired and hawk-faced and just bird similes all the time.
All the magical bird
Right.
shamans in the
Well,
forest.
and yeah, there's the magical. I guess actually we should add for reasons not to read is that both Tarma's people and the Hawk brothers are kind of are very much like post hippie Native American stereotypes.
Yeah, unfortunately it's so that's so hard to avoid in Swords and Sorcery. Like,
Yeah,
you know, the barbarian is so like we're romanticizing, you know, the nearest horse archery culture.
yes,
And you know what the nearest horsery is the word that I tend to use. The nearest horsery culture to us is so yeah, no, that's just a part of it. It always is. This one is not as tasteless with it as it could be.
yeah.
Is the best that I can say for it.
Yeah.
There's this weird fetishization of like work that hails from like the most prosperous America ever was or will be, that it's like, man, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have any of this civilization? It's just we never happy, never goddamn happy.
I was just so winding back to the to our hawk shamans, and it's interesting. We have like 3 different examples of non-binary characters, like well before this was, you know, and in any sort of part of the culture. We have Tarma, who is, you know, by divine act, a complete, you know, both asexual and also doesn't really have gender exactly, because these books kind of assume that that sexual orientation and gender are intrinsically linked, in a way that feels very much of its era. And then you've got Worrell, who's a neuter, but who's still definitely male, even though that's his interior voice. You know, and you have these creatures, this intelligent cat wolf people who have 3 sexes and yet somehow still have binary gender. And then in the short stories, there's the one where they meet the one hawk shaman, hawk brother, who is like so perfectly androgynous that the magical sword finally decides that she might as well treat him as a woman because, you know, and she'll figure it out later.
Yeah, no, that is one reading. Although I think that there's plenty of room to read that that character is transmasculine, particularly given the rules that we've already established.
It's entirely possible. There is I feel like there's a thing later on where the sword also decides to play nice with a guy who's just like really flamboyantly gay, but I could be misremembering because, again, have not read any of these books in a very long time.
I don't think that happened.
No. In a later book.
Oh, in a later book. Okay.
In a later book. The sword keeps coming back.
Because we do get that the sword is probably what heals Kether's love interest, the archivist guy.
Right.
At the end.
Right. In response to her need for him to be healthy. So, like, you can help a woman by saving a man as long as he's a good man who has the love of a good woman.
Right. Like I did want the sword to be more of a problem. Like when it was introduced, I'm like, oh, really acknowledging like how inconvenient it is that it won't help men and that it's calling them to help any woman, sort of no matter what the danger is. And I feel like that just goes away because it would get inconvenient if the magical sword was really a problem. And I was a little disappointed that it wasn't more inconvenient for them.
From what I vaguely recall, there's a book about Kether's granddaughter, and the sword is a much bigger problem for her.
Okay.
There's a short story in the 3rd book wherein they're cursed with bad luck and the sword gets them into trouble a few times.
Oh, good. One thing I wanted to say is I really thought the camping scenes were very realistic.
Yes!
It's something that's really been on my mind recently, talking to some people doing a long hike, and all they talk about is, oh, and I had to carry 4 liters of water. Oh, I carried 6 liters of water. Yeah, I mean, it was a long road until we got to the next water place. And then the weather wasn't really good. Yeah, but the weather the next day. So just obsessing over where your campsite is, whether there's water and food, and whether you're sheltered from the wind, and that just being 99% of what you can think about. And this was really one, like I believe that Mercedes Lackey has done a lot of camping.
Yes.
And so that was really fun.
In her author's note, she says she hates camping and wants and is very much a homebody. So,
but I guess I get either. Well, you know, there's the famous Ursula Le Guin story about how the one time she ever, you know, there's so much sailing in Earthsea, and the one time that she ever tried to go out on a boat, she managed to sink it in 3 feet of water.
Right. Well, you don't know, kids. Just research it well.
Exactly. But yeah, the camping worked for me.
But the camping did feel very realistic, including and the amount of detail. It definitely, again, it felt like, if not her personal pet peeves about how fantasy glosses over camping, then maybe her friend's pet peeves. Or maybe this is just when somebody who hates camping writes a camping scene, they want to make it clear that this is absolutely miserable all the time.
Yeah, the characters do spend all their time talking about how horrible it is, really, pretty much across the board.
They love being indoors. They love being in inns with warm beds, and that was just really true to life. If that feels like.
Mm-hmm. So, can I share my lesbian headcanon here?
Please, yes.
So this whole thing is a D&D campaign being run by a married woman and her best friend who are trying to communicate, and her best friend and the married woman are trying to communicate some things to each other through the storytelling, but because of the circumstances, they can't really. And so we're just struggling up to it and struggling away from it and struggling up to it over and over again, until finally they're just old and they have, you know, and there's all the children around and they're like, well, I mean, I guess this is the life that we've chosen. So we're in this sort of, you know, weird throuple situation, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, no, I like that. What's interesting to me about, you know, their weird throuple situation is how even in the stories that are set, like, after the 3 of them settle down and start a school together, Catherine's husband is very much out of the picture. Like,
oh, yeah.
He shows up briefly to be like, okay, and then, you know, go back to his books or whatever. And the book, I do remember that in the sequel book about her granddaughter, Catherine's granddaughter, he's dead. He's been dead for a while. And, like, they don't even really talk about him.
Well, like, the point of him is that he is, like, this frail dude who's struggling with a chronic illness. Like, he had rheumatic fever when he was a kid. His joints are screwed up. And it's the whole point of him is that, like, see, we can have, you know, here's a healthy relationship where the stronger partner physically is the woman. Great. And we've made that point. But the problem is that physically weak people are not what Mercedes Lackey likes to write about. So he doesn't get to really be in the stories.
Yeah.
Because he can't really go out adventuring.
Right. He has to be healed enough to finish the adventure he's on, but not so healed that he needs to really be a member of the team.
Yeah. No, I think that we're like, philosophically, we think that it's important that there are people like him around, but it's not. He's not the kind of person that we're really interested in this universe.
Right, and at the same time, part of the effect definitely ends up being that, you know, for all that Catherine keeps talking about how heterosexual she is, there is one really important relationship in her life, and it is with this other woman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I mean, these women are married.
Right.
Let nobody should walk away from this book. It's like they spend so much time talking about how married they are, and like having, you know, the sort of arguments that married couples have, and repairing those arguments. It's actually really funny. It's like the moral of the story, of the big story that we were talking about the demon and the rapist bandit and all of that. At the very end, like, it's like the moral of the story isn't maybe we shouldn't have turned that bandit into a woman and set him off to be raped to death. It's, I shouldn't have, you know, been so overprotective of you, my wife.
And I shouldn't have been, you know, so eager to take risks.
Exactly. That's the big moral that we're taking away from it. Their marriage is always at the center of this, and the body count associated with their marriage is not particularly important.
Well, you know, that's for the priest to worry about now that he has a pet demon to proselytize to.
A pet demon who has also been force femmed.
Dual force femming, and it's the same body every time.
Yes. A lot of, speaking of 80s, a lot of platinum hair and purple eyes.
Yeah.
In all these, attractive women. Time for minor notes. All right. So there's a little bit of period appropriate Orientalism here. Not as much as in some, obviously, but we do have them saying hi and ayah. And
Well, if you check the appendix, there's the entire list of their of the conlang terms.
But also in the beginning, when we see her doing her sword training, she's doing katas.
Yes.
Which is a very sort of appropriate thing for that period. And I think it's funny that like later on when she's actually running a school, there's a lot of very much, oh, that shit isn't going to actually win you any battles. So somebody had a quiet word at some point about what katas are actually for. But that was funny in the early stories. There's some real like patented D&D names in these books.
So many apostrophes. And so many like 2 noun last names.
But even past that, there's some guy named Gromio in here.
That's right.
There's a Darthella.
Yeah, I think Mr. Gold Merchant is the one I remember. Like, Mr. Gold Merchant.
It really does feel like I need a name. And it can't be a normal one. Let's get this in here right now. I was delighted to hear that Catherine's youngest child is named Gender. Or Gendar, possibly.
I think it's Gendar, but...
Yeah. Depends on how you work that vowel, but yes. The story in the third book about the woman who was jealous of the other mages and her karmic.
We need to add bestiality to the content warnings.
Yes, her karmic punishment for this is that she gets fat and then accidentally turns herself into a bear and then gets fucked by a bunch of bears.
And then she dies.
And then she dies. And I was like, this, among all of the others, feels like there was somebody in the science fiction writers group that I didn't like.
Yeah.
And that one was tough.
Yeah.
It does have that classic, like, these stories do have that sort of classic feminist literature issue where we don't necessarily hate all men.
But boy, do we hate certain specific women.
We certainly hate certain specific women. We hate horny women. We hate stupid women. And they're always the same. And we hate women who do annoying things like simper or be like other girls.
But I did like that there are cool women, like Idra of the Sunhawk captain. She seemed very, very cool, and I liked that she was cool and she got to exist. And I was so shocked and appalled to find out she was dead already, when they went on there.
And so horribly.
Quest, right? And I had not remembered that. And I was like, oh, I thought they were going to rescue her. No? Oh, that's so sad.
How is there... we had firmly established by that point what the stakes of these stories have to be.
That one I remembered because one of the things that did stick with me was the image of her ghost coming back and like dragging her brother off to be melted down.
We didn't add incest to the...
There's also...
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, gotta add incest and bestiality. And child molestation, if we didn't already add that one.
Oh, God. There's just so much. But yeah, no, she has the distinction of that being the first character who we have like spent time with and who has had dialogue who gets raped to death, which is the sort of that's the escalation in the second novel, is that it's not an off-screen random character that this happens to. It's somebody that we care about, and therefore this is the ultimate punishment that this person has to get.
But you're right. Like, there are cool women who aren't just Tarma and Kethri. It doesn't have the problem that some fantasy of this era has, which is there's the one woman who's, not like all the other girls and all the other girls are terrible. You get, because, you also get Kat who helps get, Kethri get her revenge, and you have the horse trainer, you have like all of Tarma's other scouts and her mercenary.
Right.
team.
Her little crew of scouts, the peasant one who finds the trail, or the one all in gray.
I love her little crew of scouts.
Yeah. It was really nice that Tarma and Kethri aren't the only cool, good women in the world, that there are clearly lots of others.
Yeah, but there is this sort of weirdly misogynist contempt for certain kinds of women.
I mean, I don't expect like, moral perfection from everything that I read. It's just it feels like when the story itself feels like it wants to be very morally didactic, which all of these do. I mean, it sort of feels like an invitation to be like, well, what about this and what about that?
Well, and also when stories are very specifically pushing back against the misogyny of the era, it is worth pointing out, it is entirely unsurprising that, they are going to contain some misogyny of their own, but it's worth pointing out, like, what has been retained and how it's changed.
Yeah. You might, I mean, and like there are a lot of cool girls, if you want to go back and check out. I think the only story that's like really worthwhile in Oathblood is Oathblood itself, which is the last one in the series. It's the one with all of their kids in it.
The one where they met is it's useful.
It's useful,
certainly. Yeah.
But that story, all their daughters kick ass, of course, but they also kick ass in like, interesting and diverse ways. And there was really some thought about, well, do we in fact want our kids to grow up to be to be maddened by revenge the way that we were? And probably not. And to what extent can they still live in the same world that we do, but not experience the same things that we do? And is it actually possible not to pass along the trauma that we experienced? And sort of the answer that we get is that no, it's not possible to protect them.
Actually,
actually we do have to pass down the trauma, because of course we do. How else is, and it's still the same world out there.
But the thing is that, I mean, their kids, none of the three daughters get in that story get raped.
No.
Yay.
Part of that is, I think, just a little bit of a flinch. That one is written, 10 years later. But I think it's also sort of, okay, well, we can't protect them from everything, but we can at least make them better equipped to deal with how awful the world is than we were.
Yes. They do get kidnapped, I should mention.
Oh, yeah. They get kidnapped, but their kidnappers are nicer.
Yes.
Except for the one who almost kills them.
Well, yes, but even it's like, it's not
personal. They
don't default to rape in the same way that all of the other, that all of the other bad guys do.
Yeah.
Yes, no, that story is also funny. It's like, this is a Liam Neeson Taken scenario.
Right.
The absolute wrong children to...
That sounds very nice.
to make off with here. But
So I would like, as we're wrapping up, I would like to complain about the copyright page of The Oathbound, because this is something that I've been dealing with in my professional life, so it is particularly fresh in my mind. When something has been previously published, you need to list it on the copyright page or on the credits page, and the ebook that I have from the library of The Oathbound does not do that. So I cannot actually, I had to look online to get a sense of what the prior publication history is, because most of the stories in The Oathbound were not the ones published in Sword and Sorceress, which is interesting all by itself, that like the ones that, were published by her friend, those are exclusive to her friend's anthology, but the ones published in other venues, as soon as, the whatever exclusivity period is up, those are immediately getting republished as a book. But you need to have your publication history in your book. If it doesn't all fit in on the copyright page, which sometimes it doesn't, then put a little credit section at the back. It's a huge hassle.
Even pulp stuff from the 80s is always like, these versions of this story first appeared here, and here.
Right. I don't know why it's not the case in the library ebook, and I no longer have my physical copies of these books. Maybe you can check and see if it's listed.
Yeah, I've got the physical book does have two call outs. So, copyright 1998, chapter 6 appeared in a slightly different form in Sword and Sorceress 5, 1998. Chapter 8 appeared in a slightly different form as an audio tape, published by Off Centaur Publications, copyright 1985.
Oh, that's amazing. But I'm pretty sure that some of the other stuff was also previously published.
Interesting, because it just calls out chapter 6 and chapter 8. But just from reading it, it's clear that many of the other chapters were standalone short stories. Otherwise, Why do you need to keep reintroducing?
I mean, a few of them actually appear in Oathblood.
Right.
Like
and I think that those are the two that were also in Sword and Sorceress. Or at least one of them is. But at least according to, and it's possible that the internet is lying to me, but according to the internet, many of the other stories were also previously published in other venues. And if that's the case, why isn't it in the book? And if it's not the case, then whoever's running the Valdemar wiki needs to update that.
Well, I think that there's a lot to be said for recycling. And that is another thing that Mercedes Lackey says in her author notes, is that I'm good at recycling, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You got to make a living.
Well, and also in a pre-internet era, like, it's not like, I mean...
Oh, yeah. No, it's a very different story at that
12-year-old Alexis spent a very long time tracking down Sword and Sorceress 3 to read their origin story. I eventually found it in the Boulder Public Library when visiting my aunt. Like, I just visited every public library until I found one that had Sword and Sorceress 3. So that I could read that story. Like, there wasn't a way to get repackaging your short stories into a physical book made sense, because it's not like there's any other way that people are going to be able to read it.
Yeah. And I think that there's something to be, there is just something beautiful about this sort of published as an audiobook by Off Centaur.
Right.
Talking about this one bookstore in Portland, Oregon that absolutely no longer exists, that published the songs. It's like, this is a kind of publishing that absolutely no longer exists, and it's a miracle that it ever did.
And I wish it still did.
Yes.
Even if a lot of the stuff that came out of it was, I feel like there should be more opportunities to make a small amount of money off of something small and weird.
We were rich in those days. That's the issue.
We didn't know.
But I absolutely also was crawling all over interlibrary loan and such, trying to find the weird, areas where the missing parts of my my problematic faves writings were, squirreled away. So, we absolutely had that in common.
Yeah.
Whereas I think my approach was just I went to the library or the bookstore and I got what they had, even if it started at volume 3.
Yep.
And you just rolled with it. You're just there's no way to know. It's impossible.
And there was something kind of fun about that, of just, you pick up the book and you figure out what happened in the previous book as you go.
Well,
all right.
I think that we've actually one more note, just because I happened to I was screening some anime and the week that I was reading this, I happened to show the first episode of Dirty Pair. And I was like, wow, this is a familiar dynamic somehow.
Yeah. Actually going back to Bea's point about two buddies, often of the same gender, having adventures. Anime had a lot of that in that era.
This is true. This is true. Married straight women. In the case of Dirty Pair. But they had of course the real life example of women's wrestling Japanese tag teams to be working from there. So that helped. All right. I will say that we have made a podcast.
Yes.
Yay.
Thank you again. Thank you for joining us again, B.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. This is very fun.
Mm-hmm. And I have no idea what we're doing next time. So
it'll be a surprise. Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I just want to remind you that Tamara textually has a crushed larynx. I'm not making fun of her voice. Cal and Edril sword sworn I, to my star-eyed goddess bound, with my pledge would vengeance buy, but far more than vengeance found. Now with steel and iron will serve my lady and my clan, all my pleasure in my skill, nevermore in any man. Bound am I by my own will, never to misuse my power, never to pervert my skill to the pleasures of the hour. With this blade that I now wear came another bond indeed, while her arcane gifts I share, I am bound to woman's need. And by blood oath we are bound, held by more than mortal bands, for the vow we swore was crowned by God fires upon our hands. You are more than shield sib now, we are bound and yet are free, so I make one final vow, that your clan shall live through me. Now, is that not the gayest thing you've ever heard?